It being past 2 p.m, the proceedings are interrupted. The Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, this morning I was elected as Leader of the Parliamentary Labor Party. I was subsequently sworn in by the Governor-General as Prime Minister. The Honourable Wayne Swan has been elected as the Deputy Leader and will be the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. I table for the information of the House a revised ministry list reflecting those events. I seek leave to have the document incorporated into Hansard. With your indulgence, Mr Speaker, and the indulgence of the Leader of the Opposition,
there's no objection to leave being granted the Prime Minister.
I will make some very brief remarks. Mr Speaker, obviously I have already had the opportunity to speak to the Australian people through the press about my intentions and plans as Prime Minister. I will not repeat all of those words now, but can I simply say it is my intention to lead a government that is focused each and every day on meeting the needs of working families around the country. I accept that the government has lost track. We will get back on track. I have taken control for precisely that purpose. I say about the former Prime Minister, the Honourable Kevin Rudd, who is in the Parliament with us today, that he certainly has the gratitude and respect of the Labor Party, and I believe that every member of this place would be full of admiration for the remarkable and dignified way in which he has conducted himself today and the fortitude and strength of character he is showing, including by attending in question time today. Yeah. Can I say to my Deputy, Wayne Swan, congratulations on taking that position. I very much look forward to us working even closer together than we have since the days that the government was first sworn in November 2007. Can I say to the Leader of the Opposition, we are very different people. We are very different people, different outlooks on life, different policies, different views, different personalities. We've made very different life choices. I believe, though, we both understand what an honour and a duty it is to serve as Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, and I also believe we understand the responsibility upon us to lay before the Australian people clearly and precisely the things for which we stand and the things that we will do if we are elected at the election due this year, which I will call in coming months. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Yeah. The Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
Well, Mr Speaker, I note that the Deputy Prime Minister has become the Prime Minister. I note that the Treasurer has become the Deputy Prime Minister, and I congratulate both of them on their promotions. I understand, perhaps not as well as they do, but I certainly understand that to hold high office is a great privilege, and we all understand how it must be discharged in the best interests of the Australian people. May I, Mr Speaker, offer commiserations to the member for Griffith. He was elected Prime Minister of Australia by the Australian people, and he should have been allowed to face the judgment of the Australian people. Mr Speaker, a midnight knock on the door followed by political execution is no way that the Australian Prime Minister should be treated. Now, I accept that there is a big challenge before all of us in this place to offer the right policies to the Australian people. The new Prime Minister has admitted that the government has lost its way, and her challenge will be to demonstrate how things will be different, given that she is as committed, it seems, to the policies of the former Prime Minister as he was himself. Regardless, I think the Australian public can expect a fierce contest. It will be a tough contest. I respect the abilities of the Prime Minister, and I hope, as well as being a tough contest, it will also be a clean and fair contest.
Order. Order. The House. Order. The House will come to order. Order. Questions without notice. Are there any questions? The Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, you'll be surprised to know that my question is indeed to the Prime Minister. Given the Prime Minister's claim to want genuine negotiations over the design of her great big new tax on mining, I ask, as a sign of good faith, will she remove from the budget the $12 billion in net revenue estimated to be generated by the tax in its current form?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his first question to me. What I can say to the Leader of the Opposition is this government, led by the Treasurer, with the Minister for Resources here, Martin Ferguson, the responsible minister, will negotiate with the mining companies of this nation. I have said to the mining companies of this nation publicly that the government is opening its door and we are asking them to open their mines. I have also said, as a show of good faith, and this has been enacted, that the government will remove its advertising from Australia's television screens. In return, I have asked that the mining companies do the same, and as I'm advised, BHP has already taken that step. The negotiations will proceed in an orderly fashion, step by step, piece by piece, led by the Treasurer, and of course, at the appropriate time, the government will make further announcements about the resource super profits tax.
The member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House the importance of maintaining government services, and are there any threats to this?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Capricornia for her question, and I thank her for her friendship over all of these years we've been in parliament together. Mr Speaker, as I said earlier today, I grew up in South Australia. I am the daughter of a hard-working family. My father and my mother worked unbelievably hard to provide a safe and secure household for myself and for my sister Alison. From them, I learnt the value of hard work. I also learnt the importance of government services to making a life, the importance of quality schools, the importance of quality healthcare. As a family, we relied on both. Mr Speaker, families around the nation rely on both. They need to have a job, they need to have a job with decent working conditions, and they need to have those quality services. As a government, we're committed to ensuring that we take the steps necessary so that Australians have work. And that's why, during the global financial crisis, we did what we had to do to keep Australians in work. As a government, we are committed to decent working conditions, and of course the threat to that is the Leader of the Opposition's plan to reintroduce work choices. As a government, we are committed to lifting the quality of Australian schools. The threat to that is the cutbacks proposed by the Leader of the Opposition to trades training centres, computers in schools and to quality teaching. And as a government, we are committed to making sure Australians can see a healthcare professional, that they can see a doctor or a nurse, and to do that we are investing in ensuring this nation has more doctors, more nurses, and we are investing in Australian hospitals. Of course, the threat to that is the predisposition of the Leader of the Opposition to cut health funding, demonstrated, of course, when he was the Minister for Health. Mr Speaker, these are the great issues for Australian working families. These will be the great issues at the forthcoming election, where we as a government will say to Australians that we will provide the services families need, protect their jobs and ensure they have decent working conditions.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, my question is again to the Prime Minister, and I ask her, how can there be a genuine negotiation over the mining tax if the outcome has to be the same $12 billion in net revenue as is expected to be raised by the tax in its current form?
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question, and I don't know if he has ever conducted a genuine negotiation, but I have.
Order.
As a government, when we were elected with our
Order.
fair work policy. We were elected to get rid of work choices. We were elected to get the balance right. And of course, we have honoured the policy commitments in our Forward with Fairness policy. But, Mr Speaker, along the way, we sat with the representatives of business and we talked about the details. We negotiated. We talked. We sat with the representatives of working Australians, representatives of our great trade union movement, and we sat and we talked. We sat especially with the representatives of small businesses around the nation, and we sat and we talked. And those talks led to a better outcome. They led to a better fair work system than we otherwise would have had. It's that spirit that the Treasurer, on my behalf, working with the Minister for Resources, will take to these negotiations with the mining industry.
Order. Before calling the member for Hasluck, order. I inform the House that we have present in the gallery this afternoon members of the parliamentary delegation from the National Assembly of Vietnam, led by the Vice President of the National Assembly of Vietnam, His Excellency Mr Uong Chu Lu. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to our visitors. The member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House the importance of fairness in the workplace, and are there any risks to this?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Hasluck for her question. I thank her for her representation of her local community, and I thank her for the amount of her life's time that she has devoted to ensuring that Australians have fair and decent working conditions. And of course, the 2007 election was fought very, very clearly on the proposition whether or not Australians wanted fair and decent working conditions or they wanted the Leader of the Opposition's work choices plans. And the Australian people spoke in 2007 and they rejected work choices. Rejected it because of its power in stripping away pay and conditions. Rejected it because of the insecurity it gave them, never knowing if that was the day that they would be presented with an Australian workplace agreement that took basic conditions away. They rejected it because of the security, insecurity and unfairness of never knowing if that was the day that you would be told that you no longer had a job and you had no right to look for a remedy or contest the reasonableness or fairness of your dismissal. These things were not abstract, these things were real. They were real for people like Sonia and Chrissy, who feature in reports analysing the impact of work choices. They worked in aged care, a 24-hour industry, and they lost their penalty rates under Australian workplace agreements. They told in the lives of people like Jo, a young casual kitchen hand who faced pressure to sign an AWA against her will. For 3 months she refused, so the boss refused to give her any shifts. It is this kind of unfairness that we have eradicated with our fair work system. It is exactly this kind of unfairness that will be back if the Leader of the Opposition has the opportunity, as Prime Minister, to resurrect his much-loved work choices.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, again my question is to the Prime Minister, and I ask her, is she committed to raising $12 billion from the mining tax as stated in the budget?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and once again I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. As the Leader of the Opposition knows, I have said today there will be genuine negotiations. I have said today that is about those who agree that Australians are entitled to a fairer share of the mineral wealth in our grounds, working together to get the right result. Now, of course, the government believes Australians are entitled to a fairer share of the mineral wealth in our grounds. We believe that is the birthright of Australians for the minerals that we all jointly own and have inherited, minerals that can be only dug up and sold once. The mining industry has actually acknowledged that it can pay more tax. So the government and the mining industry have an agreement that they can pay more tax. We believe they should pay more tax. That is a very firm foundation stone for negotiations, and with the Minister for Resources and the Treasurer, we will build on it. Interestingly, the people in this parliament, beyond that consensus, who do not believe that Australians are entitled to a fairer share, who do not believe that the mining industry can pay more tax, those people are the Leader of the Opposition and the team that he leads. They are outside the consensus on which we will build. As we build on that consensus, of course, we will keep the Australian people informed as is proper and appropriate, but our intention is to genuinely negotiate. And once again, I would take this opportunity to thank, as I'm advised, BHP for exhibiting goodwill today by removing its advertising, as the government has removed its.
The member for Dobell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Deputy Prime Minister, why is it so important Australian families get the tax relief they need to help with the costs of living?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Yes, I thank the member for Dobell for this very important question, because the government is about supporting the living standards of Australian families, particularly when times are tough. And of course that's why the government moved so swiftly and powerfully when the global recession through the global financial crisis had such a dramatic impact on economies around the world and had led to such a reduction in demand for our economy. We moved powerfully to support employment. We moved powerfully to support small business, because nothing is more fundamental to your living standard than the capacity to earn a wage, to have a job, to keep your small business open and operating, which is why stimulus has been so important. And although it is being withdrawn, it is still supporting employment in a whole range of sectors in the Australian economy, because this government understands that not everybody is doing as well as others. And even though we have a strong economy, and even though we have a low unemployment rate, which is absolutely important to supporting living standards, there are many people in some sectors of the economy that are still doing it tough. There are many people, for example, in non-residential construction that are significant beneficiaries of the stimulus programs we have put in place, that the Prime Minister has put in place, that the Minister for Housing has put in place. These are very important to keeping the doors of small business open and to keeping many tradies in particular in employment. And that is one way that you can support living standards, particularly when you have uncertain international events in areas in countries such as Greece. Very important to support living standards, and that's why the government's action was so important to stimulate our economy, which of course was opposed by those opposite. And of course we know that if they would have had their way, they would not have supported the stimulus packages. They certainly didn't support the bank guarantees. And of course that would have had a dramatic impact on unemployment in this country. And the thing about unemployment is that when it is high and when it is there for a long time, it destroys skills, and it destroys capital, and it destroys small business, and it destroys communities. So this government is absolutely up for supporting the living standards of the Australian people. And now that the global economy is recovering, we have to do more. We understand that many people are still under financial pressure. For many people, they still find it pretty tight when the family budget comes down and it's hard to actually wrap it around the paycheck. So a lot of people out there have trouble making ends meet, which is why we've done a number of things since we've been in government. First of all, we had the historic increase to the age pension. Single pensioners on the base rate of pension have been living in poverty for a long period of time. But we took the gutsy step to make a fundamental historic increase in the age pension, which is so important to the living standards of so many people on fixed incomes. But it's just not what we did in terms of the age pension. It's what we've done, say, with the education tax rebate. So important to families when they're sending their kids back to school, finding it difficult to buy everything that they need to get the kit for the kid to go to school. The education tax rebate is absolutely important. What we've done to increase the childcare cash rebate. All of these things have been very important to living standards. But what has been very important and has continued has been the 3 sets of tax cuts delivered by this government. The 3 sets of tax cuts delivered by this government, because we understand that when you work hard, that when you do a bit of overtime, you don't want all of that being gobbled up, either in the tax take or in the withdrawal of family payments, Mr Speaker. And that is why the tax cuts which will commence next week are so important. They're not large, but they'll help people get by. They'll make life a little bit better. For a worker on $50,000, they'll get an extra tax cut of $450 per year from 2010-11. Now, of course, over the 3 rounds of tax cuts for a worker on $50,000, that's a tax cut of $1,750 for that group. $1,750, Mr Speaker. And for a worker on $80,000, it's an extra $300 a year. But for that worker, over 3 rounds of tax cuts, that's $1,550. So that's what we are doing to support living standards. But it's also important when it comes to the tax system because you reward effort. And these tax reforms and these tax cuts are an important part of strengthening the economy by giving people extra incentive to work. That's important as well. And of course we know those opposite opposed our stimulus. I don't know where we would be in this country in terms of levels of unemployment had they been in power through last year and the year before. And of course they have not supported many of the other initiatives that we've put in place as well. But we do know what would put a wrecking ball through family finances and security if they were in power, and that would be work choices. And this, more than any other policy, demonstrates how those opposite do not understand the importance of supporting living standards, because when they last were given a chance to support the workers of Australia, they attacked them viciously, Mr Speaker. And of course they're coming around for work choices Mark II. So, Mr Speaker, we on this side of the House are proud of what we've been able to do to support living standards. We know more needs to be done, but at least there's a bit of extra help coming next week.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given that the Prime Minister has confirmed today that the same ministers will be conducting the same negotiations with the mining industry for the same $12 billion outcome as before today's unprecedented political assassination of the former Prime Minister, what policy change has occurred? Or is the change what many suspect, a new face but still same old Labor, same old tax?
Order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the same old Deputy Leader of the Opposition for her question and wish her well as she serves her third leader. Mr Speaker, I have made very clear the government's. I have made very clear the government's attitude.
The Prime Minister has the call.
They just need to settle down a little bit, Mr Speaker.
Prime Minister has the call.
I've made very clear the government's view about the negotiations. Our door is open. We are asking the mining industry to also open its mind. I believe that people of goodwill can sit around a table when there is already a foundation stone of agreement, and here we have one, that the mining industry can pay more tax, that Australians are entitled to their fair share. When you have that foundation stone of agreement and you have people of goodwill sitting around a table, then you can work issues through. And I particularly am reinforced in that view because it is only a few short hours ago that I indicated publicly the government would remove its advertising from Australia's television screens, and I asked the mining industry to reciprocate that act of goodwill And already, Mr Speaker, we are seeing our goodwill reciprocated. So this does give me confidence that there is room for negotiation, there is an ability to work together in a spirit of goodwill, and we will.
The member for Ballarat.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. What benefits does comprehensive high-speed broadband offer for the development of smart infrastructure?
The Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Ballarat for her question. And the member for Ballarat is, of course, chairing the inquiry of the House of Representatives Committee into smart infrastructure. The first meeting was held here in the Parliament, attended by over 200 experts in a full-day seminar. And I congratulate the member for Ballarat on her work on that committee, and also the member for Hinkler. This is a committee that works in the best traditions of bipartisanship in this chamber. The Gillard Labor government is working very hard to deliver high-speed national broadband network, because we understand.
Order. The House will come to order.
We understand that high-speed broadband will be the communications backbone for smart infrastructure. And this is about an agenda for the future. Intelligent transport systems will be able to provide commuters with real-time information about the relative congestion, the time to be taken and the pricing of various travel options to facilitate informed decisions. Or smart energy meters that give you an informed choice of energy source, price tariff, emissions intensity or just-in-time hot water heating. Already Australians can see the promise of smart infrastructure in reality, like our investment in the Kwinana Freeway in Perth, to install advanced technologies like variable speed limits and real-time lane management systems, making a real difference today. Or our $100 million investment in the Smart Grid Smart City demonstration project, trialling advanced technologies to improve energy efficiency for homes and businesses. Or our $45 million investment to trial advanced train management systems in South Australia with satellite-based GPS and wireless broadband communications to manage train movements. We take these issues seriously as part of the future agenda, because we know that Access Economics has found that the application of smart infrastructure could increase GDP by between $35 and $80 billion over the first 10 years. This is one of the reasons why a national broadband network is so important to our future. It is one of the issues that is at risk from the opposition, and it is just one of the reasons why this Labor government deserves to be re-elected.
The member for North Sydney.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. How can the people of Australia trust the Prime Minister's word when, on at least 6 separate occasions over the last 30 days, she pledged loyalty to the member for Griffith, and yet this morning this loyalty was betrayed?
Order. The Prime Minister. Order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Shadow Treasurer for his question, though coming from him I'm somewhat surprised by it. But I do thank the Shadow Treasurer for his question. Can I say to the Shadow Treasurer that obviously, as Deputy Prime Minister, I worked with and supported closely Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. That was the appropriate thing to do. It was also appropriate for me, as a senior member of the Labor government, to think and to particularly canvass in my own mind views about the performance of the government and the best way of making sure that we were a government that was always, each and every day, serving the interests of the Australian people. As is now a matter of record, and I have said it this morning, I did form the view that this was a good government that in some areas had lost its way. And I did also form the view that the best way of making sure that this government was back on track, providing to the Australian people the leadership that they deserve, focused on their jobs, their working conditions, health, education, the infrastructure they need for the future, the big challenges like climate change. The best way of doing that was to take the course that I took last night and this morning. I'm well aware that there are others who will look at that and will form a view as to whether I took the correct course. That is the nature of politics. That is the nature of making decisions about the questions of how the national interest is best served. I made a decision and I stand by it absolutely.
Yeah. The member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the Minister update the House on Australia's commitments in Afghanistan?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Australia's commitment to Afghanistan, of course, is displayed not just by our military commitment but also by our civilian commitment and our civilian contribution. This reflects our view that the effort in Afghanistan will not be successful by military action or security enforcement alone, but also by a civilian reconstruction, reconciliation, a political strategy. And yesterday the Minister for Defence and I welcomed the announced new command structures in Oruzgan province announced by the International Security Assistance Force. The Minister for Defence yesterday and today has detailed the military arrangements. I don't propose to retail those for the House, but it is important to have a very clear understanding of our civilian contribution. Australia will play a significant role so far as capacity building, reconstruction and the civilian contribution in Oruzgan province is concerned. A senior Australian official will be the lead administrator of the provincial reconstruction team, effectively coordinating the civilian reconstruction effort. This follows on from a commitment that the government made in April of this year to substantially enhance our civilian and diplomatic presence, not just in Oruzgan province but in Afghanistan generally. And by the end of September, we will see that complement increased from 30 to 50, with increases not just from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade on the diplomatic front, but also from our Development Assistance Agency, AusAid, also from the Australian Federal Police. And that is a substantial contribution which we continue to make. And this sees in Oruzgan province a continuation of the building of roads, the building of schools and a significant capacity building effort. The necessity for these change arrangements has of course come as a result of the Dutch decision to withdraw from Oruzgan province. Can I make the point to all members of the House that we very much compliment the Dutch on their efforts. We have worked very closely with them in Oruzgan province, both in respect of military matters but also on civilian reconstruction matters. I've had many conversations with my Dutch counterpart, Foreign Minister Verhagen, up to the recent Dutch election, and we welcome very much the prospect and the hope that the Dutch will continue to make some civilian contribution in Oruzgan province. Mr Speaker, we know that Afghanistan is difficult and dangerous, and at the beginning of question time, all members of the House rose to pay their respects formally to 3 soldiers recently killed. In that context, we are, of course, very conscious of security and protection of our civilians. And as I've indicated publicly, Australian Defence Forces will continue to make judgments about the protection and safety of our civilians who operate in Oruzgan province and in Afghanistan generally, and will continue to make those security judgments and provide force protection when they make decisions to use the defence phase beyond the wire. Mr Speaker, can I conclude by drawing the House's attention to the changed arrangements which have recently been made, indeed made overnight, to the command Personnel Command so far as the International Security Assistance Force is concerned, and the appointment of General Petraeus. Can I say we welcome General Petraeus's appointment? We have worked well with him in the past. We know him well. Indeed, the Minister for Defence in the United States recently presented him with an Order of Australia for the contribution that he had made in the Iraq effort in cooperation with Australian forces. We worked very closely with General McChrystal. I finish on this point, Mr Speaker. We very much support the Obama strategy, which was developed as a result of the Rydell Review, as a result of General McChrystal's view, in which General Petraeus also took part. And the basis and substance of that strategy is that we can only be successful in staring down international terrorism in Afghanistan if we make our efforts not just on the military side, but also on the political, civilian reconstruction, capacity building, reconciliation and political rapprochement side. And we look forward to working closely with General Petraeus as he resumes his personal leadership of the ISAF military forces.
The Leader of the Nationals.
Mr Speaker, my question is also to the Prime Minister, and I refer the Prime Minister to her admission in her last answer that the Labor government had lost its way. Will the Prime Minister now tell the House which decisions of the government were not signed off on by the infamous Gang of Four, of which she was a central member?
Good question.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, and I thank the Leader of the National Party for his question. And what I would say to him is what I have said publicly this morning, which is I accept my fair share of the responsibility of the decisions taken by the government. Of course I do. Of course I do. I also accept the responsibility for forming the view that the government needed to do a series of things better. And I am here, obviously, in this position as Prime Minister to ensure that we do just that. And in doing that, we will be addressing questions like the future of the resources super profits tax, and that's already been canvassed in the parliament today. We will be addressing questions like investments in the great wind and solar power of this country. We will be addressing questions about how we continue to improve, our education services, how we continue to deliver better health services, how we can ensure having protected jobs during the global financial crisis, having done what we needed to do to protect jobs, to make sure that we continue to modernise our economy, including by providing to it the benefits of high-speed national broadband so that we can seize those economic opportunities of the future.
The Prime Minister will resume her seat. The member for McCullough on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. The Prime Minister was asked specifically which decision she was not part of.
Order. The member for
and
McCullough
while she's
resume
answering
her
it,
seat.
could she
The
tell
member
us
for McCullough will resume her seat. The member for McCullough, the member for McCullough, not having resumed her seat, can now travel out of the chamber for 1 hour under 94A. Is the member for Sturt running his own little afternoon TV show here? Because, order, I simply say to him, 2.5 years down the track, it really is just getting tiring. And I thought that he'd started off so well today, but he might just sit there and listen to others rather than talk to himself. The Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister in continuation or the Prime Minister?
Briefly, Briefly, Mr Speaker, briefly, and I do acknowledge that the member for Sturt is a performer in search of an audience. But whilst he continues that search, we in the government will continue to focus, as we have today, as we will tomorrow, as we will the day after, to focus on the needs of working Australians. And I would have to say, Mr Speaker, that sometimes when I come into this parliament, and today seems to be one of those days, sometimes when I come into this parliament, it seems to me that the Leader of the Opposition has forgotten that the purpose of this place is to serve the national interest and particularly to meet the needs of working families.
Order. 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 The House will come to order. Order. Whilst we wait. Order. The member for Ford has the floor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Finance and Deregulation. Minister, what progress is the government making in relieving the regulatory burden on business?
The Minister for Finance and Deregulation.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Ford for his question. The government is committed to delivering long-term sustainable growth for the Australian economy, and as part of that commitment there are a number of specific strategies that are being pursued. Infrastructure development, improvement in our skill formation, the national broadband network, tax reform and, of course, specifically within my own portfolio, the area of deregulation, of reforming the regulatory arrangements in our country to relieve the burden on business. There are many different things occurring on a range of fronts, Mr Speaker, none of them in themselves dramatically transformational, but in aggregate a very important program of reform across our economy that will eliminate inefficiency, that will reduce costs and red tape and that will boost productivity in the medium term. The most important process, of course, is the Business Regulation and Competition Working Group of COAG, which is gradually progressing 27 separate items of reform that are being implemented one by one over a 3 to 4 year period, Mr Speaker, with a payment of $550 million to be paid to the states at the end of that period, or a proportion thereof, depending on delivery, depending on performance. There have been occasional wobbles. Every now and then there have been small delays, but I'm happy to report to the House, Mr Speaker, that the total package is on track, that this very broad, detailed process of regulatory reform is on track. Every now and then a state upper house causes a bit of a problem. Every now and then there is a slight delay because of a state election, but nonetheless this process is on track. And an illustration of some of the very important areas, Mr Speaker, the development of a uniform national occupational health and safety regime, the development of harmonised environmental assessment processes between the states and the Commonwealth, a national trade licensing scheme so that individuals in trades such as plumbing don't have to have separate licences for separate states, the development of uniform national consumer credit legislation, uniform national consumer protection legislation, a uniform national regime for registering business names, particularly important for smaller businesses, and of course the standard business reporting mechanism that is due to commence very shortly, that enables businesses to have a single channel of information reporting to government, state and federal. There is also a process of Commonwealth reform occurring, Mr Speaker, which involves me as Minister for Deregulation partnering with individual line ministers to pursue particular processes of regulatory reform, such as improving product disclosure statements under the financial services reform process, getting them down from 50 pages and 80 pages down to a sensible size, and we have pursued this reform across a number of areas already, such as with respect to managed investments and superannuation, in partnership with respective ministers for superannuation and corporate law, formerly Senator Sherry and now, of course, the current minister, Mr Bowen. There is also a process underway of reforming our visas to ensure that we reduce the total number of different kinds of visas available. There are now somewhere over 150-odd. That is going to be rationalised in partnership with the Minister for Immigration, and we are well advanced in a process of improving the approval process for health technologies in partnership with the Minister for Health and Ageing, Mr Speaker. There are a number of other processes that are underway. rationalising anti-discrimination legislation, improving the regime for the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority, improving the excise arrangements that are administered in some cases with overlap between the Australian Tax Office and Customs. There are many other areas that are going to require our dedicated attention, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to pay tribute to the work of my Minister Assisting, Craig Emerson, who has also been a very diligent and dedicated contributor to this process. There is much more to do, much more work to do to improve the regulatory arrangements and relieve the burden on business, but very substantial progress is occurring, and this is a key part of the government's wider strategy to deliver long-term sustainable economic growth for Australia's future. Thank you.
The member for North Sydney.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How can the Australian people trust the Deputy Prime Minister at his word when on at least 3 separate occasions in the last 10 days he pledged his loyalty to the member for Griffith, yet today he betrayed that loyalty?
The Deputy Prime Minister. Order. Order. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call. Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, because yesterday I took a decision that I believed was in the national interest, Mr Speaker. Each and every one of us.
Order.
Each and every one of us comes to this House.
Order.
Each and every one of us comes to this House to look after the national interest and to do the right thing and to make the calls as we see them. I did that yesterday, Mr Speaker, and I did it for the very best of reasons. I did it for all of the reasons that the Prime Minister outlined before. I did it for all of those reasons because I did believe it was in the national interest of this country, in the interest of the government and in the national interest.
The member for Petrie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Families, Housing, Community Services and Indigenous Affairs. How is the government improving support for working parents?
The Minister for Families, Housing, Community Services and Indigenous Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I very much thank the member for Petrie for that question, because she understands through her personal life as well as her working life just how important it is to support the work and family choices of all families in Australia, because we know how critical it is to value the hard work, especially of mothers, whether they're in the paid workforce or whether they are at home. Of course, the member for Petrie understands that all women will most likely spend some periods of their lives in the workforce or at home, combining both their work and family responsibilities. And of course that's why the government provides financial support through Family Tax Benefit Part A and Part B and the baby bonus, and from the 1st of January this government will deliver Australia's first paid parental leave scheme. Australia will finally catch up with the rest of the developed world. Eligible working parents will be entitled to 18 weeks of paid parental leave paid at the federal minimum wage, and this government is making sure that this is budgeted for, paid for in our last year's budget. Of course, this government is making sure that our paid parental leave scheme is both fair to business and fair to families. This is a huge win for Australian families. It is also a particularly important win for those families who've traditionally missed out on paid parental leave. Access to paid parental leave is certainly rare for lower-income women. As a result of this government's paid parental leave scheme, we estimate that around 30,000 working families with incomes less than $50,000 are expected to benefit from the government's paid parental leave scheme. We also know that there are many casual, part-timers, many contractors, self-employed women who've also missed out. And we want to recognise that as a result of our scheme, around 10,000 self-employed women will gain access to paid parental leave each year. Many of those women will get paid parental leave for the first time. These are very real benefits for families in Australia delivered by this government.
The member for Sturt.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer the Prime Minister to the $75 million now being withheld from the New South Wales Government as a result of their bungling of her scandal-plagued school hall building program. Isn't this a damning admission from her that her alibi over the last 12 months, that waste, mismanagement, profiteering and gouging were isolated examples, was simply untrue, and that her program has in fact been beset with failure from the outset?
Member for Sturt will resume his seat. The Leader of the House on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, while it is the case that you have allowed some argument, this is all argument and the question is out of order.
I would say that it's replete with argument and order. No, and I'm sure that the member is getting to his question, but the caution that has been illustrated by the point of order of the Leader of the House should be taken into account in the preparation of questions, because there does have to be a limit about how far we're going to allow the argument to be put into the question, which is outside, as he knows, the standing orders.
Mr Speaker,
the member for Barker ain't helping.
My final
use the expressions
question to
of
the
great
Prime
English.
Minister is.
The member for Sturt.
My final question to the Prime Minister is. Rather than delivering her programs successfully, has she been more focused on delivering the blood-stained knock on the door at midnight?
No. The Leader of the House will resume his seat. The Leader of the House will resume his seat. I think that I would have to, because of the way in which that has now concluded, rule the question out of order. The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education, Childcare, Youth and Sport. Will the Minister outline to the House government initiatives to assist Australian families with the costs of childcare?
The Minister for Early Childhood and Children Services. Sport.
Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Lindsay for his question, but also for his passionate advocacy for affordable, accessible childcare solutions for his community. This government has a very clear record of supporting Australian families to manage their budgets, and particularly when it comes to the costs associated with early childhood education and with childcare. This is perhaps most clearly demonstrated by the $17.1 billion in investment in early childhood education and childcare over the next 4 years from this government. To put this in context, this $17.1 billion in investment is around $10 billion more than that was offered by the previous government in their last 4 years. We, of course, have delivered on our election commitment to increase the childcare rebate from 30% to 50% of parents' out-of-pocket expenses, with this extra support going directly to parents to help them with the cost of living. We also met our election commitment to increase the maximum that families could claim from $4,354, as it was under the previous government, to $7,500 per child per year under this government, a substantial increase of some $3,146 a year, or 72%. Last year, 670,000 Australian families benefited from these significant reforms. These reforms, which enabled them to claim up to half of their out-of-pocket childcare costs, up to $15,000 per year per child. We also know that as a result of the childcare rebate increase, a family earning $80,000 with one child in full-time care receives some $2,239 more in childcare rebate under this government than they would have under the previous government. As a result of these changes, ABS statistics also show us that childcare costs to parents fell by some 20%. In 2004, the out-of-pocket costs for a family with an income of $55,000 a year with one child in long day care was 13% of their disposable income. This has significantly declined to 7% by 2009. For a family with an annual income of $115,000 per year, the amount of the family budget spent on childcare has declined from 11% to 7% over that same period. In addition to the childcare rebate, we are also providing $8.4 billion in childcare benefit over 4 years to low and middle income earners across Australia, which means that the Australian government will cover around 80% of the costs of childcare for these families. Mr Speaker, we absolutely know that it can be really tough for family budgets and it can be tough to provide childcare solutions for those families. That is why, in total, we will provide $14.4 billion over 4 years for parents through the childcare rebate and through the childcare benefit. This is $8 billion more than the Howard government provided in childcare fee assistance in their last years. We have shown time and time again that we recognise the importance of childcare and early childhood education. We're committed to affordable and high-quality childcare, and unlike those opposite, we are absolutely prepared to put our money where our mouth is and deliver for Australian families.
The member for Cook.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer the Prime Minister to her statement as Shadow Minister for Immigration, namely, another boat on the way, another policy failure. Given that under the Howard government there were 3 boats arriving illegally per year, while under the current government—
Order. Order.
I'll start again. I'll start again.
Order.
Given that under the Howard government there were 3 boats arriving illegally per year, while under the current government there are 3 boats arriving per week, will the Prime Minister now admit that this is an area where the government has lost its way and adopt the strong border protection policies proposed by the coalition that previously stopped the boats?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And of course, I understand that Australians feel a sense of discomfort and disquiet, even anxiety, when they see boats intercepted at sea and asylum seekers taken to Christmas Island and potentially other locations for processing. It does make people anxious. I understand that, and they look to the government. They look to the government to make sure that we are managing these questions, to make sure we're understanding the full complexity of these questions, to make sure that we are protecting the nation's borders. Now, I actually have a copy of the press release that the member refers to, which I issued as a Shadow Minister in 2003, so it's quite some time ago. But if one looks at the content of the press release as opposed to just the headline, the content of the press release is indicating that it was my view in opposition that in order to deal with these questions of asylum seekers and refugees, we needed strong regional engagement with our neighbours, particularly Indonesia. I still believe that. And if we look at the content of the press release as opposed to the title of it, it was also indicating that I thought it was appropriate that there be additional naval assets protecting our border. And guess what? Under this government, we have more assets patrolling our border than ever before under any other government.
Order.
So
the Prime Minister will resume her seat. The Prime Minister has the call. She's responding to the question. She should be heard in silence. The Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Now, I understand that this is a complex area of management, a complex area of policy. I also understand that it's an area of policy where views can differ and people want to put forward different views in the debate. The only thing I would say is when views are put forward, I think we owe it to the Australian people as we address these kinds of questions to make sure those views are properly informed by the facts.
The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. How is the government making airports and air travel in Australia safer for passengers and staff?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Isaacs for his question and his interest in ensuring we maintain the security and safety of our airports and indeed our aircraft. Mr Speaker, that's why this government's proposing tougher laws for aviation-related crime. Mr Speaker, under the proposal of the government, there will be maximum penalties for aviation-related crimes. They'll increase as a result of the consultations that we've had with the airlines industry and the major airports and the state and territory governments. And indeed, of course, we've also spoken with the representatives of the employees, the workforce in those places. Mr Speaker, we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that our airports are safe and indeed our aircraft are safe. And it's for that reason I'd also ask indeed the opposition quite genuinely consider supporting the regulations that have been proposed by the Minister for Transport in relation to the capacity to enter cockpits. I think that's also very important and incidental to this very important initiative. Can I say, Mr Speaker, in relation to the sentences that would be considering for certain aviation offences, would be looking to increase up to 10 years jail for serious hoax offences such as calling an airline and saying a bomb is on a plane or threatening to bomb an airport, which currently carries a 2-year maximum jail term. In the view of the government, and I think it's true too, having seen the comments of the opposition, I hope it's true, that they would agree that that is not a significant enough penalty for such a serious offence. And for that reason, Mr Speaker, we are looking to increase the threshold to make it more similar to other type hoaxes, for example, where people might say they've contaminated goods in supermarkets, which could endanger the community. There are currently penalties of up to 10 years, and this would match that type penalty. 14-year jail sentences for offences against aircraft or aviation environments, such as damaging a runway or air traffic control facilities at a major airport, which is currently carrying a maximum jail term of 7 years and 10 years respectively, but we look to lift that. And indeed 20-year jail sentences for very serious offences, Mr Speaker, that pose danger or cause harm to groups of people, such as assaulting a pilot or endangering an aircraft while in flight. These offences currently carry maximum jail terms of 7, 14 or 15 years, and it's the view of the state and territory governments and the sector, Mr Speaker, and indeed others, that we increase that, and there'll still, of course, remain the life in jail for those who would commit offences such as hijacking or destroying an aircraft and being reckless as to causing death, Mr Speaker. The increase in penalties will provide greater consistency with other criminal legislation, Mr Speaker, and will provide greater safety and greater deterrence to such offences. These measures build upon the significant achievements of this government in aviation security. The government announced in February this year a $200 million package to enhance our aviation security, and that was a very important initiative. And indeed, these laws, if enacted, will complement, Mr Speaker, those initiatives, and indeed they will also complement the announcement that was made in December last year that we go from the unified police model at our major airports to an all-in model, which in effect means, Mr Speaker, we will have the Australian Federal Police undertaking the security of our major ports. Major airports. That will probably take about between 3 to 5 years for the transition to occur. We're working very closely with our state counterparts to ensure we do that seamlessly as possible to make sure we provide security at our airports as we bring about that very important initiative. So, Mr Speaker, these are very important penalties. They are, of course, enclosed within a bill before the House, and we would call upon the opposition to support them in order to ensure that our airports are safe, our aircrafts are safe for Australians and visitors to this country.
The member for Flinders.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer the now Prime Minister to her central role as Deputy Prime Minister in the design, approval and delivery of the disastrous Pink Bats program, which has been linked to 4 tragedies, 174 known house fires, 1,500 potentially deadly electrified roofs and the installation of dodgy or dangerous insulation in 240,000 Australian homes. Will the Prime Minister apologise to the families affected by this program, and will she ensure that every one of the more than 1 million homes at risk is inspected for safety as a matter of urgency?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And of course, I regret and am sorry for any harm, inconvenience, anxiety that Australian families have felt arising from the home insulation program. Of course I am. Of course I am. As is well known in this parliament and obviously well known in the community, there were some tragic deaths involving young people that are the province of proper inquiries, coronial inquiries, occupational health and safety inquiries and the like. When any person dies at work, obviously that is a tragedy, and we have proper processes to investigate such tragedies, and they are in train now. What I can say to the member is the government acknowledged, and I acknowledge on the government's behalf, that this program did become a mess, and the government had to act, and we did act, and we continue to act through the relevant minister to deal with the consequences of this program, including the need for inspections. But what I would also say to the member who has asked the question is he is well aware that the insulation program was part of the urgent delivery of economic stimulus, as we did what had to be done as we responded to the global financial crisis. And of course, these were difficult circumstances, the biggest global economic downturn since the Great Depression. And we faced a prospect where hundreds of thousands of additional Australians could have been out of work. Now, I understand from the voting record of the member and the voting record of the Leader of the Opposition that they are less concerned, continue to be less concerned, and were at the time less concerned than us about keeping Australians in work. But we are driven by a passion of ensuring that we have Australians in work.
The Prime Minister will resume her place. Order. The Minister for Trade. Order. The member for Flinders on a point of order. Member for Flinders.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, is the Prime Minister saying that these tragedies were acceptable collateral damage?
The member for Flinders will resume his seat. It is not. The raising of a point of order is not an opportunity to raise a supplementary question. The Prime Minister is responding to the question. The Prime Minister has the call.
And of course I can say to the member that is not what I am saying. What I am saying is that we provided urgent economic stimulus because we were deeply and passionately concerned about the circumstances of working Australians and enabling them to have the benefits and dignity of work, to have the ability to take a pay packet home, the ability to continue to pay their mortgages, the ability to provide all of the things that families need for the care of children and to ensure that they can look after themselves. That is what drove us with the provision of economic stimulus. on the home insulation program. We have fulsomely, and I am prepared to fulsomely acknowledge the major problems with this program, which caused the government to terminate it and which means now that the relevant minister, Minister Combet, is dealing with arrangements including the making available of home inspections.
The member for Longman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Health and Ageing. How will the government's health reforms deliver more accessible care? And what is the government doing to train more GPs to deliver more primary health care investments?
The Minister for Health and Ageing.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Longman for his question. I know he's been following the health debate with great interest and that constituents in his electorate are already benefiting from the investments at the North Lakes Health Precinct, particularly those constituents that need renal dialysis. But I was asked about the broad range of our health reforms and particularly the investments we're making to train more GPs to deliver more services to working families and particularly the elderly, who are, of course, big users of health services. A major part of our health reforms are looking at what we can do in the provision of GP services, whether it comes to GP infrastructure, GP training places, rural incentives to make sure we've got enough GPs working in our regional capitals and in the bush, whether it's after-hours support, whether it's making sure that we pay for practice nurses so that they can assist GPs in the work that they are doing. And I'm very pleased to be able to advise the House that tomorrow applications will open so that GPs are able to apply for funding at more than 400 GP practices across the country, up to $500,000 for GP practices to be able to expand their facilities, to be able to employ extra staff, to be able to train the future workforce. Of course, we're very excited about this development because it means that our constituents across all of the country have the opportunity of having enhanced services in their areas, and it will make it easier for them to see a GP when they need a GP. Of course, unfortunately, this investment is opposed by those opposite. We know that the Leader of the Opposition has a bit of an issue when it comes to GPs. He capped their training places when he was the Health Minister. He has on his budget list already a savings that will pull hundreds of millions of dollars out of GP areas. And one of the things he also didn't do when he was the Health Minister is adjust the rates that were payable for supervisors who are prepared to train GPs. And I can also announce that I have just recently provided information to the AMA, the AGPN and the College of GPs to provide an increase of 20% of funding to be able to support those GPs who want to train young GPs to stay in general practice in the future. Now, of course, we are very proud of this record. We know that when we are committing to training 5,500 GPs over the coming decade, that we will need to encourage more of our existing GPs to help train others. That's what this announcement this week will provide for, and I hope that the Leader of the Opposition will seriously reconsider the budget cuts that he has flagged, because I am sure we will be overwhelmed with GPs across the country, from electorates on this side of the House and on this side of the House, anxiously wanting to apply for these funds, which will expand their services and provide more benefits to families across the country.
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.